to Simpler. We are three pastors, husbands, and fathers on a journey to make life simpler by holding Jesus as the core for every belief and practice. This journey has shaped us to be more like Christ, freed us from the shame of failure, and encouraged us to a deeper love of our Lord and God. We invite you to join us in the discussions that have shaped and continue to shape our lives.
The thing that's really interesting about, well, we don't need to talk about math.
We can make it the math episode if you want to.
The best thing that I've ever heard to this point in my life, because I read a lot of books on mathematics and how to think, and the best thing that I ever heard was by this brilliant mathematician who just said that math is a language that we're still developing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about how we have concepts like, hey, give me half that sandwich. But 2,000 years ago, there was not a concept of half a sandwich. So if I had a sandwich on my plate, you wouldn't say, give me half, because the mathematical concept of half was not in common vernacular. So they would say, can I have the sandwich? And you would cut a piece of the sandwich and give them to him, but there was no concept of half. Also, there was no concept of negative numbers. That didn't mathematically exist in the thinking of the day, right?
Yeah.
And so those were things that have been developed. And so one of the things that he says, he's an atheist, but at the very end, which as a Christian, I loved this, he goes, everything that we know and understand about the universe is based off of the current mathematical language that we have. And he goes, and none of us who are mathematicians, serious mathematicians, believe that we have the language figured out. And he said, and so how the universe works and all this stuff is a language we don't have developed yet.
Ooh. Ooh.
I like that.
Which is funny because I feel like there's a lot of scientists who don't feel that way.
Yeah, but apparently the top people in that mathematical field do feel that way because they're recognizing the limits
This
of
is the reality.
Yeah, which is super cool.
I want to go have a conversation with people who didn't have a concept of half.
Right?
Just try to figure out what is. I can really break it
How
down.
do you- how do you talk about
Are you going
that?
to say portion? Or what are you going to talk about here? If I do this, I now have two whole sandwiches. It's also how I would never cut a sandwich.
gonna
But
say, like-
you know when you grab a
like how you
sandwich and you just rip it in half? What do I have now?
Hey, Jess, can you do a video for us where show us how to rip a sandwich in half like this?
Well,
like by breaking
yeah,
a stick.
I was going to say, it's not even like, he said ripping, but it's not even ripping what he's doing.
It's
like
demolishing a sandwich.
taking a stick and bracking it.
It's not like
Let's move on.
Yeah, you didn't go like this. You went like this.
You know, anyway.
What kind of sandwiches are you making, man?
We can talk about that later. Let's go on over to the PCC. Let's come on over the Culture Corner. What's up, everybody? Welcome. Sit down. Get comfortable. Today, we're talking about meme culture just a little bit, because I feel like what I'm about to talk about. Did you like that? That was my beatbox.
Can we go walk on a heel?
You can walk on a heel. It's like, I feel like it's had a massive resurgence recently, even though it never really died. And that's being Rickrolled. And so, are you guys are you familiar with being Rickrolled? So,
There's been some good ones lately.
yeah, right. So
came
like,
back.
it came back hard. And I feel like it was kind of dwindling for a while and just like really lit the flame. So, for those of you who may not know, but being Rickrolled means
Rick Astley, man.
well, how do you say his last name?
Astley?
Astley. So Rick Astley had a major
donkey.
yes.
You got to say the T.
Had a Astley had a huge hit in the 80s called Never Gonna Give You Up. And Never Gonna Give You Up. I won't sing too much. That way there's no
you down.
Wow, but you just did. Copyright infringement. Where like you click on something will have some sort of clickbaity title and you click on it and then that song pops up or that video pops up. And back when it first happened to me was MySpace days when I felt like it really began to take off. And people would either post at the time a bulletin or post a comment of like, oh my gosh, you'll never believe this. Then you click on the link. And back then there wasn't lightning fast speeds. It was like you click on it and you have to wait for it to load. And so you're like, oh gosh, I can't wait for this. So for instance, when I was younger during MySpace days, that would have been like when Star Wars Revenge of the Sith was coming out. I was really into Harry Potter, so there was a lot of Harry Potter forums that I was a part of. So people would share these things and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to read this new Harry Potter forum that people are sharing. And I click on it and then I like get up and go make a sandwich and rip it in half and come back because that was how long it took for it to load.
Oh,
and I'd
gosh,
sit down
those days.
and I'd be like, oh, it's loaded. And I'd go to press play and you hear do.
funny.
And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I remember the first few times it happened, I was like, oh, I guess I went to the wrong page and I'd exit out of that and I go back to the link.
Do it
Oh
again?
my gosh, yes, dude! Like multiple times back. Well, how does this link get in everywhere? I was not in on the joke at all. And looking back, I love that for whoever shared it to me, because that means I sat at my computer for like well over 20 to 30 minutes trying to get this link to work.
They got you, man. They got you good.
Really, yeah. So what's funny is if I were to not know that being Rickrolled is a thing currently, and you were to ask me, hey, could that exist in today's society? I would probably say, yeah, but it wouldn't be as effective because you can generally kind of see what type of link you're clicking on. You can preview links and text messages, and you can see some things. So like, yeah, it might work, but I just feel like if everything loads so fast, it's like, oh, okay, that's funny. And you go back, it's not a big deal. Like how it was for me trying to reload this link over and over and over again. But man, you're right. There's just been so many good things where really what it is like it'll be interjected into the middle of a video where you're like really into what's going on.
Dude.
And then you see his hands come out of nowhere and he's doing that dance. And I just love it so much. And then I saw the other day, or actually a couple months ago now, there was a Cartoon Network show that said, hey, remember when we Rickrolled everybody at the Macy's Day Parade? And at the Macy's Day Parade in like the mid 2010s or so, they're going through and they're playing their theme song, and like they have their mascots like singing it, and then all of a sudden you hear a record scratch and you hear the beginning of the song, and Rick Astley comes out and climbs to the top of the he's saying
That's
so
awesome.
there's like this huge Cartoon Network,
like the whole
parade, yeah, and he's saying it live to everybody.
Awesome.
So everybody's getting pumped for their favorite cartoon
I bet
characters.
he's pumped about all the income that's coming in.
Oh, right,
times
dude.
the songs being played.
Absolutely, yeah. Just I should have looked that up
He's
beforehand.
probably the one who started the Rickroll.
I know. He was like, I need to get back on track again. How can I do this? Like, well, there's a thing called MySpace.
That's so funny.
I meant to save a couple. There was one the other day that I saw that really like pushed me into really wanting to talk about it. But part of me too, that I did see a TikTok kind of on the same vein that it was like one of those fake interviews where somebody's talking to themselves and they're just redoing the camera angles. And this guy walks into the Pentagon. He goes, hey, sir. He's like, have you ever heard of Gen Z? And I think he's supposed to be the president. And he's like, oh, yeah, funniest generation ever. And he's like, yeah, actually. Then he begins to break some of the funnier things that are happening on the internet now. He's like, did you know all of those were written and made by millennials? It's like, so do you know that probably the funniest generation on the internet right now is actually millennials? And then what's so funny is that like, yeah, I mean, sure, whatever. But I don't want to get in an argument about generations. But what I have liked about it from the vein of being Rickrolled is that like, here's something that innately is funny, like pranking somebody in this way. And we did it in a very millennial way with with the tools we had. And now with TikTok and with Instagram Reels and with the different ways that you can share media now, it's like Gen Z has just taken it and rolled with it. And I Rickrolled with it, ayo. And I love it so much. I'm just trying to wait for his reaction to Dr. Pepper.
Millennials did start.
Y'all made fun of me so much that I had to keep it.
Keep your enjoyment.
Here's how I know. I mean, you could make a case that it was like the in between or millennials.
Mm-hmm.
But Gen X, they weren't making sandwiches when they were doing links. They were loading their floppy disks in to get their game. And then it was dial up. And then they were going, they ran to the grocery store and picked up the kids and came back so their game loaded.
And if somebody accidentally picked up the phone while you're doing that, you're like,
dude,
crud.
How funny would it be if like the original Rickroll was somebody had saved like a MIDI file to a floppy disk. He was like, oh yeah, man, you can borrow my homework. And he gave him his floppy drive. He gets home from school after that day, pops it in.
That's awesome. I saw a Instagram post the other day that showed a picture of Oregon Trail. Like
the classic, man.
He goes, yeah, you know how old you are if you recognize this.
If you get stoked on
but
it.
Millennials are the ones who Gen X was not capable of figuring that stuff out.
Yeah.
Like when MySpace came out, it was like the millennials were the ones who were like making their own page look good.
Yeah.
Because they understood how to code.
Learn HTML, yeah.
I mean, there's obviously Gen X that knows how to code, but like it wasn't Gen X didn't grow up with that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They grew up with Oregon Trail.
That's right. How great would it be if you finally found your resources on Oregon Trail you need and you open the box and we should code an Oregon Trail like
I
that.
am telling you right now that 47 years old, and if I could find a legitimate classic 1987 Oregon Trail game, I would buy it.
Well, you know, you have to play that on PC.
Oh man, I would.
You'd have to buy.
I would buy a computer for the purpose of playing.
What you would need for that?
I could figure a way to make that happen.
Yeah,
true.
Yeah. I mean, I'm telling you,
I'm not sure you can connect that one to the internet though.
The nostalgia that I have from that original game, you know?
Dude, I bet they have an arcade version of it.
Well, everything I've tried to find some versions of it, and all of them are so updated, and it's like, man, this is
want like the original.
No. I want the classic, like that I grew up on.
I know someone we can ask about that.
All right, good.
We'll figure that out for you.
Yeah, my birthday's in May.
That would be a really good birthday present.
That would be a good birthday present.
Get you like a Pentium 1 computer. No, it'd have to be before that. It would work on a Pentium 1.
Like an Apple 1 or Apple 2 and like really get
That's what I had. I had the first. I played Oregon Trail on like the old school Macs.
In sixth grade, the sixth grade school that I went to, middle school that I went to in Norman, Oklahoma, was the tornado shelter for the community, and so it was kind of underground a little bit. And it was one huge building that just had modular walls put up so that you could move in a hurry, and so. But during finals, if you finished early and you had to have a certain grade going into your final, then you got a pass to go to the library and play Oregon Trail.
That's dope.
And man, I would hurry through my finals. And at the end of each semester, I was playing some serious Oregon Trail, dude.
That's right.
I loved it. Died of dysentery so many times.
That sucks.
That does suck.
It does.
What are we talking about today, Ryan?
Struggle bus.
I know it's real today, man.
I'm gonna like code in on our little board, the song.
Yeah,
we're gonna give you up, and every time you mess up a word, I'm gonna.
What are we talking about today, Ryan?
Today, as promised last week, we are talking about church leadership. Now, we've already done a podcast on church leadership, so today we're specifically talking about how we structure church leadership at the 456, why we've chosen to do it the way that we do it, and what we think the benefits of that are.
Yeah. But Micah, what's it like to work for Ryan?
It sucks. It's funny. Like in the years we've been doing the church, people just assume that there's a senior pastor and they assume it's the person always preaching. So people literally will ask me that, like, what's it like to work for Ryan? And that's what I usually say. It sucks.
Yeah. 13 and a half years we've been doing this, and it hasn't been a ton, but periodically you have been asked. Yeah. So, what is it like to work for Ryan?
And instead of, in my mind, like, it's too long of a conversation with the people that were asking me to have the conversation, so I'll just say it sucks. Instead of telling them like I don't work for Ryan, I'll just say it sucks.
They're going home going, man, Micah does not like to work for Ryan. So we do not have like I am the lead pastor of teaching and preaching.
We have, just to clarify that, clear the air real quick, because you're right. We are a model where we have multiple lead pastors. It is led by overseers who are also the lead pastors, which we have,
which is us.
We do not have right now, but in our model we have overseers who are not lead pastors. So some people will call them like lay elders or lay overseers. Without using that word, like every lead pastor at our church is also an overseer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who will be overseers who are not lead pastors, who are not on staff at all.
I'm pretty sure we talked about this on the other podcast, but while most people use the term elder and overseer interchangeably, or pastor and elder interchangeably, we don't. Because we don't think the Bible does. And so when Micah correctly, I think, uses the term overseer, that's what you see in 1 Timothy 3. Those are the people who are over the church and leading the church.
Who are responsible for
the care of the church and the preaching
of the church. And there's qualifications for those people, which 100%. Is when we take those very seriously.
Yeah.
So
there are not, at least it appears, the same types of qualifications for elders in the church who, from Paul's perspective in Timothy, like he's telling Timothy to appoint elders. He told Titus to appoint elders. He and Barnabas on their first missionary journey went back through all the churches they administered and appointed elders. And the word literally has a connotation of older people, like people who had been around and who kind of, I don't know. Anyway, so we think overseer and elder, while there may be some overlap, are not necessarily the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking about that.
Yeah, what you said is incredibly confusing. I know what you mean, so let me clarify.
Please.
Paul sometimes uses the word elder to describe old people.
Yeah.
And sometimes the word elder is used interchangeably with the word we use overseer.
You think so?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's I'm curious what the other example would be. You think that the word's the same. So is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think the word's the same.
Right. So like when he says like the older women take the younger women and the older men take the younger men, that word is elder.
Right.
And that what we're saying is a different connotation than what he's saying in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1.
100%.
That's what I'm saying. What you just said made it sound like they're the same thing.
No. They're very different. And so there are qualifications for overseers that are explicitly given in the text.
Yes.
There are not the same explicit qualifications given for elders in the text.
Okay, just to clarify, Ryan's not saying elder in terms of leadership when he's saying the word elder. Right now.
Right.
That's why it's confusing, because most people will say I'm an elder-led church. We're using the word overseer to describe what most people would call elders. So you saying that makes it sound like it's two different things. We're not saying that at all. We are, if you will, an elder-led church in terms of the usage of the word elder, in terms of the correlation with the word overseer. So just for context, we're going to use the word overseer from now on for 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 qualifications of someone, a man who leads the church in a specific role. So let's just for the rest of today, because I think what you just brought up was a little confusing for most people. Okay. I know in your head it's clear, but it was very confusing.
Okay.
What it sounded like you said was elders and overseers are two different things, even though they're the same thing.
I've never said they're the same thing. I don't think they're the same thing.
A different conversation. You're not considering that people use the word elder to describe overseer.
Yeah. So from a cultural perspective, a lot of people...
You're trying to... what you said's correct. What you're not considering is that most people don't understand what you just said.
Yeah, I'm sorry. They don't have the beginning foundation. Yep. I'm with you. Good.
So for the rest of today, we're just going to use overseer for context. Sorry, just to clarify that, because that was going to get really weird, because you were going to use the word elder and overseer interchangeably for the rest of the podcast, and it was going to get really confusing.
Not interchangeably.
I'm saying like you would at some point say elder-led or something like that.
Gotcha.
And you wouldn't mean it that way, and I'd have to clarify that's what it was.
I'm with you.
So just for the rest of the podcast, we are an overseer-led church.
And culturally, people would say that we're an elder-led church, which we're fine with.
Which is fine, so that's why we use the word overseer, which is maybe is a good point as to people would ask, like, why do you guys use the word overseer and not elder? There are two different Greek words that seem to have two different roles in the church. Correct. Plus, I'm not interested in being associated with someone who shows up at my front door with a name tag and a white button-up shirt that says they believe Jesus became a God. I have no interest in that. That's a side note on that.
It is. But it's fair. And to your point, I'm assuming, wrongly, but I'm assuming that people are already familiar with why we use the word, but they're not.
Yeah. So we're overseer-led. So what I was going to say a second ago before that is we have pastors at our church that are not overseers.
Correct.
And we feel like the concept of a pastor, not in terms of cultural usage, because you mentioned this a second ago. A lot of people will interchange those two things. If someone's a pastor, they are an overseer, which can be the case.
Can be.
What we feel like is that there are the Ephesians 4 people that God has given as a gift to the church, the apostles, prophets, evangelists, and pastor teachers, if you will. Mm-hmm. And the idea of that is like the shepherd, the pastor teacher, which we would call today pastor. That there can be someone who is functioning in the role of a pastor or a shepherd that is not necessarily functioning in the role of an overseer.
Correct.
And so that's where we land. Although us three are overseers, we are also pastors. So there's some interconnection there between those things. But someone in our viewpoint, someone can be a pastor at a church without the necessity of them being an overseer.
Right. Mm-hmm. I think in our culture, people use those words to all mean the exact same thing.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And if you're the pastor of a church, you're like the lead.
As an example, and again, fix it if it's making it too muddy, but pastor, we would argue from 1 Corinthians 12 is a spiritual gift given by God, or Ephesians 4, it's a spiritual gift.
Or 1 Timothy. I mean, Ephesians 4, they are probably gifts, but the context of Ephesians 4 is not that those are gifts, but those things are gifts given to the church.
Yeah, what's 1 Timothy?
Or is that whatever you mentioned a second ago? You said
1 Corinthians.
1 Corinthians. Sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you said
so
Timothy.
The spiritual gifts. And so a pastor, being a pastor is a gift given by the Holy Spirit, according to first. Whereas an overseer is, according to 1 Timothy 3, he says anyone who desires to be an overseer desires a noble thing.
Yeah.
So it's an appointment, and eldership is also an appointment, because
I think you should avoid that for the rest of this conversation. I know what you're doing. It's going to get really confusing. So that's why I'm being strong and tempering you away from that, because you're not clear, I think, on what the confusion that will happen when you do that.
The point being that people use pastor interchangeably with those other two words. And while, like Micah said, there's some overlap We would all consider ourselves pastors, i.e. shepherds of the church.
Yeah.
But we are also all overseers. We have some people in our church who are naturally shepherds, who are shepherding people, but are not overseers.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I don't think there's a necessity for that either.
No, not at all.
Which is also why I think,
because that would be really weird to say that, hey, you have this specific spiritual gift, so you have to be an overseer.
right.
Yeah.
And I think it really just comes from the typical form of churches today in the West.
Yeah.
Is like that's typically how we do it. Is we use that term in the same way we would use the term church, like interchangeably. Like we might mean the body of Christ as a whole. We might mean a local church. There's different connotations of that word. So, but most of the time when someone says I'm pastoring this church, the assumption is I'm the lead guy. I'm the overseer.
Well, a lot of times you'll hear people teach, hey, pastors have to be, and then they outline 1 Timothy 3.
Yep.
And it's just not the same Greek word there, which is, we get that. Like, I mean, look, language, we talked about this on the last podcast. Language changes culturally. But if we're going to say something is biblically true, we need to be really careful to handle those words the same way the Bible was handling it, instead of adopting it into our culture.
Yep.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do is, I grew up in, as you guys did, in like Baptist churches where the churches were primarily run by committees. We don't do committees. We are not,
or maybe more specifically, deacons then committees.
Yeah, true. So the word deacon in Greek means servant. And most of the churches that I was exposed to growing up, most of the churches that my early ministry took me to growing up were churches where there was a teaching pastor who was kind of over the deacons, and then the deacons were the primary decision makers of the church.
Or like when you say teaching pastor, because in today's culture that implies a specific role. You meant like there was a singular pastor who taught every week. Yeah, senior pastor. Yeah.
Head pastor guy, whatever. And usually it was interesting because, at least I can't say this for every place across the board, in many cases, the people who were deacons in the church were not qualified to be overseers. And deacons aren't supposed to be overseers anyway. Deacon and overseer are two different things. Overseers are overseeing the direction of the church and the teaching of the church, whereas deacons, the Greek word literally means servant, are supposed to be serving and ministering to the needs of the church. I think we see that really clearly in, Acts 6, where the Hellenistic Jews are not receiving the daily distribution of bread. And Peter says, look, it's not right for us to give up the preaching and the teaching of the word of God to wait on tables. And he doesn't devalue that. But what they then do is they pray about it, and they appoint 7 godly men to minister to the needs of the church, which are the deacons. And so Peter was operating in one role, and then Stephen, who was one of the deacons, was also operating in a different role, but both for the benefit of the church. And that was somewhere along the line in certain churches, it got confused. Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, if it's interesting because people will ask us, well, do you have deacons? Kind of like
servants? Yeah.
The answer is always yes.
Do we have
a deacon board or an official
I think we have, there are people that we have, if you will, appointed to be in that role.
Yeah. And some people who were just naturally in that role.
Right.
But I just do it.
Yeah.
Just serve.
I think when people think about that, they're like, well, who's the deacon on call this week for hospital visits? Which I actually don't hate. I think that's, if you're going to have deacons, that's the best way to have a deacon.
Yes. Those kinds of things. Yeah.
But that's they're waiting to open the bulletin at church on Sunday to see who the deacon
on
of the
bottom
week
of the page.
Which I still don't hate, because I think that's actually what deacons should do.
Serving.
Yeah. But we've heard of so many deacon board meetings where they argue about whether you should drink alcohol or like
ours is not formally assigned. Like, our deacons don't have regular meetings. Our
take on that text in Acts is that the reason Peter appointed them was because there was a need that wasn't being met.
Right.
And so our perspective is, the idea of deacons or servants is that they meet the needs. And so if the needs being met, if it's happening, we don't feel the necessity to have like a formal deacon group, if you will. That's like, you can't serve unless you're one of the deacons. And that's kind of how it happens in a lot of churches, is like, I'm not going to function in the role of a servant if I'm not appointed as a deacon.
Yeah.
We have treated, a lot of churches denominationally have treated deacons in a way that we probably would rather see it treated for overseers.
Sure.
Where they're like ordained as deacons.
Right.
I'm still confused about that.
Yeah.
Ordaining someone as a deacon. I still don't understand that. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
There's a lot of churches that do it. I have never gotten a good answer biblically why people ordain deacons.
Yeah.
You ordain people in terms of leadership, which would probably be the role of like when Paul tells Timothy, I left you in Ephesus to appoint elders, or to appoint overseers. Sorry, I did it. To appoint overseers.
No, he was all like, Ryan, you're going to mess this up.
Yeah, that's part of it too, is I know we all are. You know,
Yeah.
To appoint overseers, like this is more of in my opinion, this is more of what ordination is following the pattern of, rather than like Peter appointing Stephen. Now, granted, Stephen obviously was someone who knew the scriptures. He was someone who was spoken very well. I mean, there's a whole sermon of Stephen, or sermon, if you will, like his response to someone, right before he dies. But I think that it doesn't mean that
he's incapable of teaching.
Correct.
Yeah. He's
so
just not an overseer.
To your point, there's the gifting of shepherding. I would say there's the gifting of service.
There is, but then there's also deacon.
And there's also someone functioning in that role. So there is the essence of what we see as overseers as it's something to attain to or be appointed to, rather than just say, well, God's gifted me in this way, I get to serve in this role. It's an appointing. Paul tells Timothy to appoint people for that. Like you mentioned a second ago, Paul says if someone desires to be in that role, it's a good thing to desire. So that's why we are overseer led. If you will, in that way. And so how we describe it, just to be clear, so everybody gets the language we're using, contextually within our culture, how we describe that to people is we're an overseer-led church, and then in our pastoral staff, we have lead pastors. There are multiple lead pastors, and then we also have other pastors who serve in the church that are not lead pastors. And the lead pastors, really the only difference is they serve in an overseer role. Right. So they carry the responsibility of an overseer, while someone who's a pastor that's not an overseer.
Well, and I think for the sake of the conversation, to make it, because you keep saying they, like we're talking about our church, so it's us. Like we are the overseers.
Yeah, I'm just trying to describe it in a general term, because I think people want to see like the model.
Sure, but I just to be clear, we're not talking about, there aren't other lead pastors or overseers right now in our church. It's the three of us.
Yeah.
And so like Pierce is over student ministry, the lead pastor over student ministry, and what people have done in the past, which we're just, I don't know if we're uncomfortable with, it's just not the model we followed, is what people have done in the past is they go, okay, Micah, you're the worship pastor, Pierce, you're the student pastor. And then they would say, Ryan, you're the lead pastor. Because like you said earlier, Micah, people perceive that the guy that's on the stage preaching Sunday after Sunday is the guy in charge. And we don't do that. We don't believe that. All three of us have equal say. Micah is the most gifted. I don't think I'm gifted at all in this area, but out of the three of us, Micah is definitely the most gifted in terms of administration. And every year at our staff retreat, pastor retreat, overseer retreat, whatever we need to call it to be appropriate, Micah will kind of reevaluate our roles and where we're spending our time.
Which we'll call it something like vision. Yeah, I feel like administration is not my strength.
No, but you're really good at casting
direction
vision
and vision rather than administration.
And so Micah will do that, and Pierce and I will 99 times out of 100 default to Micah's recommendation on that. Not because he's in charge, but because we do recognize that he's very good at that.
Well, it's just a role. We're all functioning in the roles that we're.
And
we all do have input on that stuff.
Oh, I'm not saying but we're usually going, okay, that makes sense. You know what I mean?
We all feel like it's collective.
Yeah, 100%.
When you come to us and say, here's where
I'm teaching for the next sermon, 6 months.
We might have like input on that, but it's collective, and then we trust you that this is your area that you're overseeing, if you will, and we trust you in that.
Yeah, and so we three feel, I mean, I do. I think maybe Pierce, you might be the only one. Like, do you feel equal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think you didn't a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, and Mike and I have talked about that more. Just about
because you weren't a real dad.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. Just the nature of our relationship. I think it's not necessarily that I ever questioned equality, but there was just an essence of like, I've learned under both of you guys, and so there's just and Mike and I have had, I think, a few conversations at the time about that, of just like how the nature of that relationship probably isn't going to change a ton, but the way that I view it and handle it can, if that makes
Sure.
sense. Like if I can kind of interject within that. So I think initially it was just weird. It was weird would probably be the best way to say it. Whenever I became brought officially into the overseer role. But I think looking back, it's probably that nature of our relationship is probably still the same, even though we've grown closer as friends. But I think that there's a deeper understanding and a deeper grasp of that equality. But I don't think I ever felt unequal, because you both were very clear with your language and how we've handled things and how we've handled meetings and all of that from the get-go.
Yeah.
So I don't think I ever felt unequal. It's just figuring out how does that work with my view of our relationship.
I think if any person we bring on as an overseer will always feel like Ryan and I are in a different conversation, because we've had these conversations for
20
years, and I think we think about those things differently than most people. Even though you've been around it for a long time, I'm sure that the majority of the time in those like working through theological conversations, I bet we still have the majority of the conversation.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't, but the only reason I mention that is to prove the point that doesn't mean that you don't have
input
or you don't have a different weight in the conversation.
Oh yeah.
So it's, I think some people would view it as like, unless you're engaging in the conversation equally,
you don't have
as much weight.
33% talking every
time. Right. So it's just not, it's just to prove your point, Ryan, in that comment, like that's not how we view it. Like we don't view it as like, even in us three, we don't view it as like, if we're having the majority of a conversation about some particular issue, that Pierce has less weight in the conversation than we do.
Yeah. I've never felt unheard or unincluded. I don't know.
One of the things I think that this goes back to what we talked about last week that makes us being able to change the form to fit our chief goals of making Christ known and building community. We don't have to push that through committees for 6 months.
Yeah.
Like literally, we have staff meeting every Monday, and now Darren, who is a pastor but not an overseer, is part of that. And we'll talk about, hey, what if we change this up next week? Or what if we do this different next week? And then we look at each other and go, yeah, okay, what if it looked like that? Or hey, what if it looked like this? Okay, sounds good. And that's it.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of people, I have an acquaintance that feels very strongly that churches should be congregationalist churches. Is that what they're called? Where the congregation has to vote on every single thing. Micah, how many times have you and I seen churches like get hamstrung because they're going to put something to a vote, and then 100 people who are no longer attending that church but still on the membership rolls get to come in and sway the whole thing. I mean, to that end, we don't even do membership the same way that other people do membership. Like, I think we were supposed to talk about this on the last episode, but like, people have asked me like, what do we need to do to be part of this church? We love this church. I'm like, show up, like,
be a part of it.
Yeah. And maybe to take it farther, like, come be part of us.
Yeah.
Come join us for worship. Be someone who takes part in care of each other at church. Be part of the community.
Yeah.
Like gather with other people. So like actually come be part of it.
Yeah.
I think what it does too is not having, we're not opposed to membership.
No.
We just don't feel like it's, for us, this is not the best mode to accomplish the goal we're trying to accomplish. Because what we've seen in our experience around here is that membership carries a connotation that we weren't super interested in carrying. Plus we probably view church discipline different than other people in terms of like what the Bible says about it. I know it's going to ruffle a lot of feathers, but and the most of the conversations I've had with people about why they do membership so staunchly is because they want to be able to implement church discipline, and you can only do that with members. If our viewpoint of church discipline is a little different, then there's just really not a necessity for membership. So, but what it does, I think, is it gives, doing it the way we do it for us, is it's given our people like a sense of ownership in a way where even if something happens, they're gone for a while. Like we've got some people who will like leave the country for a little while, or like they don't feel like now they're not part of the church, or we're not going to them saying, listen, as a member, you're required to come be part of us on a fairly consistent basis. If you're not going to do that, we're going to kick you out as members.
Right.
So there's not that sense of like, I have to have an obligation to do these certain things because I'm a member.
Yeah.
Plus side note, and I know all of you, my close friends, like hate me for this and totally disagree with me. Like, you tell me membership's in the Bible and maybe you're taking a concept from it, but it's not in the Bible.
Yeah, it's not there. Not
like,
the way that
you can say that you can take application from certain things, but let's just be clear on the statement. The concept of membership
to a local body
of church is not in the text.
Yeah. The concept of being included in the body of Christ comes with faith in Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That's the requirement.
Right.
Faith in Jesus.
So
we feel differently about like, oh, you went to a different denomination. Well, if you're going to be part of us, you got to be baptized now. Like we,
like got to clean that off you.
Yeah,
what we would want to know is like, have you put your faith in Jesus?
Yeah. Right.
If you did and you got baptized after that, what was the intent of that? And we can have those conversations.
Sure. But we're not going to prevent you from coming and worshiping with us because of that.
You know what's funny? We've had people who've said they want to get baptized. We didn't tell them they had to, but they said, listen, I put my faith in Jesus. I know I'm a believer, but I'm not sure I got baptized like after that.
For the right reasons, or that I understood
and they'll say,
it.
Like, is it okay if like we're doing these baptism services, a few times a year at Nolan's place or somebody else's place? They're like, can I get baptized? That's what we've seen. Instead of like telling people you have to get baptized as part of us.
Yeah.
We're seeing them go, wait a minute. I want to like express my devotion to Jesus because I want to make sure this is right. So we've seen some really, really, really in our few years, healthy growth of people without the bonds of a traditional model of the local church.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say the traditional model's wrong. I'll say for me, there's a lot about it I don't like.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, two big pitfalls of having what around here in a lot of Baptist churches is the preacher on Sunday mornings, the guy on the stage, whatever you call him, he is the guy in charge. And two pitfalls with that are, one, we have all seen churches where that bred a lot of pride in the guy who just, he treated all the other pastors on staff in some large churches where you have 15 other guys on staff, men and women. He treated them all like his servants.
Yeah.
And you're going to do what I want to do. And this is my vision and this is whatever. So that's one pitfall, is it can breed pride. I'm not saying there aren't any large churches where there's not grace.
Yeah.
The other thing that it can do is we've had friends who were the guy in charge, but were so isolated in that the deacons or the committees would come in and strong arm the pastor.
Yeah.
Not like we talked about last time where they're saying you can't teach this or that, but no, we're not going to let you hire this guy, or no, we know our church is growing, but we're not going to let you do this. Like he has no wiggle room.
Right.
And so we keep each other in check.
Mm-hmm.
When we talked 3 years ago about my preaching style changing, we talked for us at length about what that means. The reason I say for us is I think that most people, it would be like, well, we talked about that for 6 weeks. I think we talked about it for an hour and a half one morning over breakfast.
Which means it's something we had already thought about. And this was kind of like the final conversation about it.
And so we had, and also because we trust one another.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're able to have conversations in shorthand. Because we trust one another.
Absolutely.
And because we've worked like this for so long.
Yeah. And so when I come in and sit down and I'm like, well, I'm not going to be able to preach for an hour anymore. And we're talking about how does that look? How do we need to change it? And you guys are going, well, man, we need to keep Christ as the center of it. And what does it look like to do this? And what does it look like to do that? And I'm like, okay, well, how does this sound? And you guys are like, yeah, that sounds good. And an hour later, we've got that hammered out, and there's a lot of freedom in that.
Yeah.
When, like we said last time too, that the only way that one of us is getting fired is if the other two of us come and go, look, you're no longer honoring God. And in a situation like that, it would be less about firing and it would be more about like, we're going to ask you to step down for a little while. And you need to spend some time with your family, and you need to spend some time healing and growing.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're going to continue to pay you for a little while so that you're not just kicked out. Like there's a camaraderie there.
I think what it says is we don't take the office of overseer lightly.
Not at all.
Yeah,
in other words, if we feel like someone's qualified for that, our take on that is that you aren't just like, if someone's disqualified from that role, if you will, based on the qualifications Paul gives Timothy, we don't feel like that means you're disqualified forever.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you're still someone who probably has the gift of shepherding or pastor teacher. and are in a place in life where you don't qualify, which doesn't mean you wouldn't qualify later. So to your point, Ryan, like we take it so seriously that if we've appointed someone to that role, which is part of the reason we only have 3 right now, because we take it that seriously.
Yeah.
If you have someone in that role, we feel like that means even if they do something stupid and are disqualified, that they are probably the kind of person who can come back again later to be in that spot. That we take it so seriously.
Yeah.
And more seriously now after the debacle of what happened a few years ago with our other overseer.
Who denied Christ.
Yeah.
Which is like, that was a different scenario.
Like how in the hell did I miss that?
Yeah. And we, hindsight being 2020, you go, okay, we should have maybe seen some things. But
I think it's to be clear, I think you and I were so excited about moving forward with Pierce and Kinney that maybe we overlooked some things.
Rushed
it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe I had my little like bells going off periodically, but I thought those bells were going off because of the personality, not because of something else.
Because there was friction in the personalities. Yeah. It's it's interesting because what we have acknowledged, the 3 of us, is that in our culture, specifically West Texas, evangelical church kind of culture, most people are going to have the mindset that I'm the guy in charge. And so I don't know if you remember this several years ago. It was before Dove Creek, but several years ago, Dove Creek is where our church is located now, if you didn't know. But I would say stuff like, Pierce and Micah and I were talking about this, or Pierce and Micah and I discussed this, and da-da-da. And you guys came to me, Micah, you specifically, and said, you don't have to say that every time. Like, what I was trying to do is make us all the teachers, even though I'm the voice.
Yeah.
And like what you said is, no, you don't have to do that, because I think we're in other ways representing that we're. So for example, we're really good, or I think we've gotten really good at compartmentalizing. So when somebody comes to me and asks me a question about youth camp, I send them to Pierce. It's not that I'm not familiar with probably most of those things, because we've talked about it at staff meeting, but it's not me. That's Pierce.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about the form of the service or why we do something in the service, I'm sending them to Micah, and Micah could answer questions. Pierce could answer questions about literally anything I'm preaching. But if either of them are approached by somebody that says, well, what did Ryan mean by whatever? You go, well, go talk to Ryan.
Yep.
And we stay in our lanes, and we call for assistance from each other when we need it. And so
that's probably been the biggest strength in this model. Like I have friends who tell me this, and I think they're right. They're like, dude, Micah, that this model wouldn't work in the majority of churches. And I think they're probably right, because people don't know how to operate like this. They're so used to it being a different way, where you have like one lead pastor, one senior pastor, and everybody else has their roles, but they all work for the one guy.
They have to keep reporting back.
Yeah.
To the
so
one
like
person.
I think what that has bred, opinion, is it has bred almost a dissension for your role. So like I've seen youth pastors who were like, I can't wait to be pastor so that I can have the say one day.
Exactly.
And that's the wrong perspective. It's bred this dissension over the role that they're in, instead of it being like, you're the student pastor because that's where your strength lies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that a student pastor is less qualified as an overseer than someone else.
Biblically shouldn't be. Yeah, right? Like shouldn't be less qualified. But I think that sometimes churches put people in roles because they're available.
I think that's what it is. I'm not saying, I wouldn't go as far as saying it shouldn't be, because I think that we as we could be us 3 overseers and hire someone else to do student ministry someday. That's a pastor that's not an overseer.
Yeah.
Your point is, what they do is they think the student pastor role is only for people who are not qualified to be like a lead pastor.
Yeah.
That's what you mean.
It's like a stepping stone role.
And I think that sometimes people don't take the roles in the church super seriously. And so I remember more times than, I don't know, a dozen times, I've preached at churches that were looking for pastors. And they'll say, oh, we found this guy. He went to this seminary. He led this church and grew it from 100 to 400 people and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, but what does he believe?
Yeah.
What is he? How does he treat his wife?
Like, we don't care. He just screwed the church.
And 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 you go, golly, like that's not what
You know,
you're
the question
looking
we
for.
should start asking is, well, what's the buffer you're okay with until he starts sleeping with other women?
There you go.
Like how long are you okay with the growth
How
until
much
it
money?
implodes?
Yeah, how much money can he bring into the church?
Not that it
You know?
happens every time, but
Right?
you're
But
just like you're admittedly those churches are setting that guy up for failure.
oh yeah,
Like it's sorry that he would take the role and that they would put him in that role.
yeah. I once asked a church that was talking to me about getting a new pastor. I was like, and I get the model that we live in. I understand it, but I said, I do find it a little odd that sheep get to pick who the shepherd is. and I was like, I just don't see how that makes any logical sense.
Yeah.
You know? And the only other way that it would work is if you had a group of overseers at a church who all said, you know, look, none of us feel like we want to be the teaching pastor, so we need to find a guy that we can bring in to be an overseer with us who is gifted that way.
Yeah.
And they can make those
and then
decisions.
the overseers can make those decisions. But I think it's so weird that
It's the other way. Yeah. I'm with you. Did you guys see, did I send y'all that Twitter post about with the picture of the overseers / elders at Matt Chandler's at the Village, like re-implementing Matt Chandler into his role? Did you see that?
I saw the picture.
So there's a picture, and then someone did a post that says they started quoting the requirements for an elder, for overseer.
Yeah.
It said all of them, and at the end of it, it said, and also must own a puffy vest, because they were all wearing the puffy
yeah, you
vest.
did send us that.
And I've never read through all the comments in any Twitter post, but they were so funny. I started reading through all of them, and I got down to the very beginning of the posts, and people were pissed.
Really?
Like, you should not be like making fun of this scriptural thing. And you're just like, dude, you got to chill out a little bit. Like,
right, come on, there can be some humor.
He's just talking about the puffy vest, but
Yeah.
but okay, that's an awkward situation. Nobody really knows outside of that group of what's going on, what happened. There's a lot of debate about it. What I do like is there's a group of men functioning in the role of overseers who made the decision and dealt with it and moved him out and then moved him back in. It wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, one about the sheep, it is mind blowing to me that you would have people feel the necessity as not gifted in the area and not appointed to be the leaders to feel the necessity to make the decisions of the leadership role in terms of ministry without understanding it. It feels a little bit to me like the Old Testament when Israel said, no, God, we want a king.
Right.
Like, here's the kind of king we want. And I feel like there's some place, I'm sure I listened to it, where God was like, well, I gave you the king you wanted.
Yeah.
The kind of king you wanted. That's what it feels like to me, is people are saying, we want a pastor who looks good, sounds good, can grow the church, can bring people in. Man, crap. All right, I'm going to go off on a tangent for a second. When my dad got voted in as pastor, because he's in a Congregationalist church, when he got voted in as pastor in the mid to late 90s, there was a retired pastor and his family was at the church. They were some of the ones counting, and when they were counting the votes and noticed that my dad was going to get more than whatever that was required for him to get 70% or something like that, they just dropped the vote deals and left the church. No joke. Here's what they said: we are not ready to have a non-white pastor in our church.
Golly.
This is in the 90s.
Yeah.
Because he said
non-white, and then he didn't like his look, or
it didn't look good. And God, I wish that guy was alive. I'd still kick him in the nuts for being a freaking, like, what an asshole to like take that perspective. And as strongly as I feel about that, I feel the same way about churches who want to put a pastor in that just fulfills a certain look. And listen, that's why we take that role so seriously, overseer. This isn't just people are going to look at us and go, well, you guys are just overseers because you're friends. No, we hold each other accountable in terms of the qualifications, and we would absolutely, all of us would do this, take the other person off, take one of us off as an overseer if we didn't fit the qualifications. We would 100% do it, but we take it that seriously, that this isn't about the look. This isn't about the dress. This isn't about whether we can grow the church or not. Crap, what do we have, like an average of 50 people for 10 years?
Oh, less
than that. Our annual budget was like at one
5,000.
Yeah, and at one point it got to like 20, I think, right?
Yeah.
Annual budget got up to like 20 grand.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like people could look at us and go, well, y'all should have put different people in place because y'all are failures, which is what some people told you.
Oh yeah.
And it's a stupid, I feel as strongly about that perspective as I do about the dude who was being a racist idiot about my dad becoming pastor. That's how strongly I feel like we should all feel about it, because this is the role of the overseer.
Absolutely.
And that's why we do church the way we do it in leadership, because there's just too many pitfalls the other way. I'll say this. I don't think any of us would say that someone is wrong if you're in a church and there's just one person in charge. What I mean is like
not sinful.
Not sinful.
Not sinful.
What we would tell them, like, as we've had pastors call us who are in that role, we've said you should begin to implement this structure where you begin to train other men who can function in the role. I think that, side note, because I keep saying men, we feel like the qualification for an overseer is exclusive for men.
Right. Overseer.
Just overseer. So people are like, well, how do you feel about women pastors? Well, we usually ask, like, what do you mean by pastor? Are you talking about an overseer? Or are you talking about
the spiritual gift of shepherding? Yeah.
So I think we wouldn't tell someone it's wrong. What we would say is we think it is the better model to follow what Paul told Timothy.
Sure. Well, and I don't know, like, is it the Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church? I know the Anglican Church. That there's a group of overseers, and I'm not saying that their model is the best way to do it, but like a church doesn't pick its pastor, the board will send a pastor to a place. Yeah. And so
which is funny because they actually just modeled that after that's a carryover, I believe, from the Roman Catholic model.
I'm sure it is.
Not necessarily because it's a biblical.
Right.
Because I think Paul's model is in the local church.
Yeah. So what we would argue is that, I mean, I love to teach and to preach, and I don't see that coming to an end anytime in the near future for me. Your dad, Micah, is 67, and he still loves it. You know, there will come a time it's time for me to step down, and what we will do,
maybe.
I mean, let's pretend I die next week. You know, it's coming at some point. The hope is, and we've talked about this with Pierce, and that like the hope is that we so multiply people in our church that what we'll be able to do is bring somebody that's a pastor, an overseer already maybe, or somebody who has been a pastor for a while but maybe not yet been brought to it, but within the church. Like the church will continue to grow because the church will supply those spots.
Yeah, we're raising. What does Paul tell Timothy? Raise up godly men who are also able to teach.
Yeah. The things that I've entrusted to you in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who are also able to teach others. Yeah. And
which we feel like is part of our role.
Yeah.
So this is not just us three saying, oh, we're overseers, we're good. No, we are intentionally investing into other people, whether they know it or not.
Right.
With the intention of seeing whether they will be someone who can fit that role.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we have this idea that like, I don't know that any of us would say it this way. We wouldn't go, well, we're in charge. What we would say is that God has gifted us and that we're overseers. We are to care for the church and to lead the church. And
I feel like for us, it's more of like, not burden in a bad way, but the carrying the burden of the leadership. So it's not like we're in charge. It's that we feel entrusted with the burden of leading the church in the right direction.
And I love that choice of word, and I love that you also qualified it. None of us are resentful of the burden.
No,
we love it.
Yeah, this is something that delights us. This is something we enjoy. This is something that we are doing because, I mean, I don't continue to read and study the Bible because I have nothing else to do. Like I continue to read and study the Bible because I believe that the truth in the scripture, I'm going to try to start saying it this way. I think that the scripture rightly taught has immense eternal value, right? And I want to handle that well.
Yeah.
And I want to see lives changed. And you guys, what's really like, what's great is I'm not sitting here with you guys week after week at staff meeting going, hey, Pierce, how's your Bible reading going? Like, we're not doing that. Like what we know, we know each other. We know each other well enough that, I mean, just things like the text you sent the other day, Micah, about 2 Samuel 7, and just, you had a thought. You know,
random.
Based off of that reflected.
Might be right, might be wrong. Who knows?
Well, at the very least, what it does is it gives us more things to think about in terms of the framework of that discussion,
For
right? Sure. And it addressed a sermon series from 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
And so what it shows is that we are continuing to grow and continuing to challenge one another and continuing and it helps a great deal that we're friends.
Yeah.
It really does. It helps that we've watched each other's babies be born, and that I got to perform your wedding, man. Like Pierce, that was awesome. I stood next to you in your wedding, Micah.
Yeah.
Like you were in mine, and like we are friends, and we care for each other's wives, and we care for each other's kids, and we want to like.
I can't imagine doing it another way.
No, and
I keep hearing stories about churches who have our same model where they don't like each other.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
It doesn't.
Because you're going into the office every day, whether you like it or not, with a little bit of bitterness and a little bit of resentment. And we don't have that.
You mean because you have to go to the office, or because
Yeah, for real.
yeah, that's another thing. That's an interesting point. We don't have office hours.
Is, what's funny is I don't think any of us would mind having an office space.
No,
like where we could do things. What we would mind is having like required office hours.
Had to be there, yeah.
Yeah.
Man, good luck getting us to that point.
Well, and like, yeah. But
I bet we would, if we had office space, we would use it.
Yeah.
We would be in
definitely.
the office some.
Yeah.
But not because we had to be
not
there.
the way that people think.
Yeah,
it would be a catalyst for the ministry rather than a requirement.
Here's just a question for you guys who maybe have a different model than us. And it's an honest question, but it's meant to kind of poke at you a little bit, is like, do you expect your pastor to spend 30 to 40 hours in the office a week? And if so, what is your hope for that? You know, like,
are you telling him you really suck at preaching? You need to spend more time in study?
Instead of being with the families and being with people and going to the hospital, and
you want to take a shepherd and send him to a conference rather than putting him with the sheep?
Yeah, you know, like just let.
No, you can't be with the sheep. You got to you got to get in your office for a while.
There is a weird, like, I don't know. This is all perceived from my perspective on like social media and some people that I know who've been through Bible college and seminary and stuff. But there is a weird perspective culturally of like, you have to have done your due diligence for this week's sermon. And so what's interesting about that is like, and so I remember when like Mark Driscoll would post these pictures in his library where he'd have like just dozens of books laid out, all of his papers with scratch marks and highlights and all this stuff. Yeah, I know, right?
Photo op.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he made that mess when he first moved in. He's like, I'll just take a picture. I'll move some stuff every week. But like, there's an aspect of reading through the comments. I remember that back then, even my own perspective at the time was very much like, oh, this is how a pastor should do this. Back like in the 2010s, whenever he was first starting stuff. And I remember thinking like, you really got to take like 15 to 30 hours a week preparing every week's sermon. But I think another thing that shows is that if you expect that of your pastor, which I'm not negating the need for study and not negating the need for community, for discussing these things, for growing in these areas. But I also think that if you're telling somebody that they have to do that every single week, they're basically, you wipe the slate clean of everything you know, and you better not take that in the next week's sermon. You got to learn a whole new thing before you go in. You're showing that you don't actually trust them as a teaching sermon. You trust them as some sort of sponge who can take up all this new information, regurgitate it, and then do the same thing every single week.
Yeah.
Instead of trusting them as a teaching pastor who has a heart to know, just like you had said, but also has spent the time already to kind of go into it and to proclaim these things.
I'd be uncomfortable with calling someone a teaching pastor if they can't teach until they spend a few hours in study.
Right.
Well,
I'm not saying like that it would be polished every time, but like if you ask someone just on the fly, like, you know,
teach this text,
or give us this. I mean, maybe they don't know that particular text as well, but like at least giving you the concept, like, hey, what is Ephesians dealing with? Like, I'd be uncomfortable with a teaching pastor, someone in that role who would say, well, give me like 3 or 4 days so I can study the book of Ephesians. It's a strange thing that we, to your point, Pierce, that we ask people to function in these roles, but who have no idea how to do it. It's like hiring a coder who doesn't know how to code, and you have them come in, they have like a basic understanding of what code is. They have to learn a new code every time they have a new assignment.
Right.
Yeah. That is a weird concept.
Yeah. If it's taking you 20 hours to prepare a sermon, you either don't know the Bible very well, or you're trying to reinvent the text every time.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. And to put a caveat on that, like,
please do. There's an asterisk, I'm sure.
I think it's just because you put a specific number. Like, there are people, if you want to spend 20 hours,
go for it.
Oh, totally.
Do it. What you're trying to say is, if the necessity for you to teach requires
every time.
an immense amount of study every time.
Listen, if you're brand new to pastoring, it might take you 20
That's true.
hours.
Yeah.
It really might.
Or
you might
I
be
think
having
you should
to
just say a long time.
Sure. Well, yeah, he said 20 earlier, so I'm stuck on it.
Got
That's on me, man. I'll take it
It's
back.
okay. It's me. I get in the rut, the Yukon. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's from a book. Anyway.
I don't know that book.
I don't know
I
that
thought
book
it's
either.
funny you said Yukon.
Yeah. So
I like Yukons.
it's the Yukon
Yeah.
trap.
It's like the upgrade of the Tahoe.
So, well, this is the mountains. This is the gold rush. But
Well, we're talking about cars now, so you need to get with it.
Man, those
I don't know
AT4
anything.
Yukons. Whoa.
I don't know anything about cars. No, but yeah, if you might be brand new and you might be going, okay, I need to really search out what Ephesians is
Yeah.
about, and it
Oh,
might
totally.
take a long amount of time. I've been doing this for 28 years, and I look back on the first 20 years, and I was like, man, I was an idiot. Like my aim was to know God and to make God known, but man, I was an idiot.
You study in terms of like, I'm using that word loosely. You spend a lot of time in the text, in the scriptures.
Now, these days, yeah.
Well, I mean, like, you can't tell someone you've been teaching for 28 years, you should be good at it. Because there's
No.
people who do it for 28
totally.
years
Yeah.
badly.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is like, you could be new and say, I don't have my bank stored up yet of like understanding of the
Sure.
scripture. And you said this earlier, like we feel like we're continuing to learn. So it's not like
Yeah,
we're there.
always.
But we feel like the more time we've spent in the scripture and discussing the scripture together, to use the phrase again, we feel like our bank is like getting a little bit more,
Yeah.
more and more understanding of the scripture. Like there's
Yeah.
a little more stored up, even though every once in a while we'll see a text that makes us think about something we said 7 years ago,
Right.
whether
Yeah.
it's right or wrong. We're still thinking about that.
Yeah.
It's like, I bet you would say, Ryan, as a teaching pastor, you feel like there's some strength in the conversations we have together in terms of how it affects you and your understanding of scripture and
All
ability
the
to
time.
teach it.
All the
So
time.
I think that's it. Like my guess is the people who spend hours and hours and hours and hours in study every week so they can do a Sunday sermon is probably because they don't do this, what we have, where there's not in conversation as
That's
often
true. Yeah.
with people that are peers of theirs and talking about the scripture. Because then you feel the necessity on your own. Like I got to make sure I get this right.
And you know what? Let's just say that. Like if you're a pastor and you're in a system where you're kind of at the top of the pyramid and it all feels like it falls on you, it is really, really important to have people that are in your life, in your world, that you value as equals, that even if the church doesn't value them as equals, you
Right.
know, like they're not the same anyway, but like that you can do this kind of life with,
Yeah.
that you can ask hard
I
questions
guess
of.
even if it was other pastors at other churches.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're a lay person in a church, like maybe you're going to be that for your pastor. Maybe you're going to be that friend.
Oh,
But
true.
if you're not, then pray for your pastor and encourage your pastor to develop those relationships, because what enables us to work so well together is the relationship we have together,
Yeah.
and that we have the same goal and we have the same
Yep.
intent, and we have had intense conversations.
Mhm.
And do and will.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
But because our trajectory is set,
Yeah.
we always are fine. Like we
Yeah.
always come to the other
Well,
side.
I think that's the benefit, is that we're able to have those conversations not based on just our preferences.
Yeah.
Even if our preferences are like intermingled in the conversation, which I think is always the case.
Yeah, for sure.
Hard
If
to
we
avoid that.
understand the goal, then we're able to navigate those, because the hard conversations don't come from frustration against like each other.
Right.
They come from, I think all of us would say this, they come from us saying, I feel like we should be going this direction. It seems like someone else is going this way.
Sure.
And it's just bringing everybody back together.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes it's not correct. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's a misnomer of what's going on. And that's just part of the conversation. It's
Sure.
part of the journey.
Yeah.
But we've never, to your point, we've never changed our trajectory. It's always
Yeah.
been about the goal of honoring Jesus.
Well, the three of us are incredibly different people.
Mhm.
And there's a little bit of overlap between me and Pierce and me and Micah. And there's a little bit of overlap between you two. And like, but we're very different in our
Yeah.
personalities. What enables us to work is because of the goal,
Yep.
because of Christ.
Absolutely. It can happen. I keep hearing about more churches who are taking this model.
Yeah, it's fun.
I'm not just talking about like an elder led or overseer led. I'm talking about churches who were, because I'll say this, there are churches who are, just for the sake of this comment, I'll say elder led, because that's
Uh-oh.
how I often use it, that are quote unquote elder led, who one or two things happens that I think is pretty terrible. One, the elders they have are not qualified. It's basically the same deacons who weren't qualified before. They just call them elders now. Second, I hear this a lot. They'll say we're elder led, but we have a lead elder. I'm still confused about that. People very close to me in my life will say that, and I haven't, and I won't. But I'm always like, I don't know
what does that mean
by that. Like, and I'm trying to think, like, is there a text that they're pulling that from? I don't think there is.
Yeah.
If what they mean, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. If what they mean is there is an elder who is giving vision and direction,
sure.
But I'm not going to call that the lead elder. That's just the role that particular elder functions in. You guys aren't calling me the lead elder because I am more visionary in terms of like where we're going as a church.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or we wouldn't say that Pierce and I are less qualified as our role of overseers because we're not the ones teaching every week. It's the same kind of thing in my mind. It's the role you function in, not that there's a lead elder. So I think that there are people who, quote unquote, have elder led that is not really
elder led. Yeah.
Nice. So yeah.
Nice.
Do it right, you know? But yeah, again, do you want to say a simpler view of our leadership?
It's a plurality of leadership. I think it's maybe a simple view of our leadership is that the goal of the leadership is that Jesus is glorified in us as we shepherd well, as we lead well. And that's always been the goal. No matter what happens, I called my dad a while back and told him about the financial gift that was given to us towards a building. And I was saying, you know, what's different about, I feel like how we are is the church right now, I don't know how many people on a consistent basis, like 220, 230, somewhere in there. Let's call it 225 for a round number for Ryan.
There we go.
225. If something happened and we went back down to 40, we would continue to do church the same way we're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it doesn't change. Our trajectory doesn't change because what else do we do?
Which is really refreshing. I think because like we talked about a lot the last episode as well, you're able to form that regardless of, you're able to form, to take your core values, your core goals, to take the heartbeat of keeping Christ as core into any situation. You have 10 people, you have 1,000 people. Like we can keep, while the form and the function may look a little bit different every time. I mean, obviously, like we have 1,000 people, we're going to have more community groups than we do with 200 people.
Right.
Like, but the core, the heartbeat is still the same. And so like the way that we may build people up or train people to fit certain roles is always going to look the same. If we have X amount of people, if we're in this space, if we're in that space, if our building burns down and we go back to meeting in the YMCA, what is now the YMCA building, like the location may change, but the heart doesn't. And I think that's so crucial. And what's brilliant about our understanding of those core values, as well as understanding of our role of leadership, is that whenever we do approach a conversation, may it be intense or lighthearted, either way, it's not coming at it from the standpoint of, I'm going to feel personally attacked, or I'm going to feel either, or the other way, personally built up, but rather it's coming at it from a heartbeat of this direction of keeping Christ as core, of having these core values, of doing these things. And so we all understand that. So there's that foundation that's firmly built. And so if we have a conversation that's more intense, we don't take it personally, but rather we say, oh, okay, well, how can I get in step with or in line with?
We probably do.
Oh, I totally take it personally.
Well,
but I'll be over it in a little bit.
I think that's probably part of it. Yeah,
because it always hurts. But
I can see that.
You don't just get bitter and leave. Like
Mike is over in 30 seconds. I'll be over in about 3 days. You're somewhere.
But I think even
like an hour.
Even in the midst of it,
never gets offended.
It's not like you disappear for 3 days though. I think that So like even then, there's still an understanding of yes, this may hurt. It might take some time for me to adjust to this or whatever this is.
Because I don't hate you guys. I hate me.
There you go. Yeah.
So
that's fine.
But anyway, so the weight of Christ's core, the weight of these core values will supersede our personal feelings because of the understanding of that weight, the understanding of the weight of the gospel, the understanding of the weight of the leadership roles that we have. That will always supersede whatever our personal feelings may be. And we also know and understand that this isn't an attack against me, even though I'm hurt right now. I have to adjust to this. It's not.
Which is also how leadership in the church should be in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not allowing your emotions to dictate it, but allow the gospel to dictate it. 100%.
You're going to get your feelings hurt, so just know you're going to get your feelings hurt, but let that not shape your decision making.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. Dope. Fun stuff. I enjoy it.
What's it like to get your feelings hurt?
I don't know.
I'm just
man.
kidding. I'm messing with
You know who gives me the strongest feelings?
Mm.
That's Steven. Steven.
Did you say S. Steven?
S. Steven does.
Esteban.
S. Steven.
Hey, S. Steven.
We're at The Garden Audio. As always, go check out At The Garden Audio on Instagram. Go see what Steven's got going over there. Find his most recent photo. Slap a huge thumbs up on there just to show him your appreciation. And while you're over there, we are at Simpler Pod. That's where you can connect with us on social media. If you have any more questions about our leadership structure, about how we've gotten there throughout, how we've gotten there biblically, how we've gotten there and how that's worked out throughout the years, may it be with 20 people, 40 people now, 225 people, ask questions, message us, reach out to us, and just reach out on there. It's a great place for us to see that community build and see you guys kind of interact with everything. Yeah, and as 2023 grows and as we record more episodes, we're going to be needing more topics as well. And so if you guys have any just generalized questions that you want to hear us discuss, shoot them over there at Simpler Pod. You know what? As always, keep Christ as core. What could be simpler than that? We'll catch y'all next week. Bye.
Bye.
That was so good.
It was so aggressive.
Your face.
It was so aggressive.
My kid, it was like you were like, let go.